No. There's a difference between hearing and listening. See, white people, y'all can't hear Jimi.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.
Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I'm an artist, an alchemist, an activist, an author, a musician, a radio show host, a podcaster. I am all of these things, and I am none of these things. This is a reminder: if you find the Buddha on the road, you have to kill him. This is an old Buddhist koan, which basically is saying, if you find the Buddha, it can't be the Buddha. So get rid of him, because that's not the Buddha. And that's why I say this at the beginning of every episode, to kind of give you a little context of some of the places I've been, but to also remind myself that that doesn't mean I'm not a free spirit, a free soul that is able to make a decision at any moment, in any now. I want to start by thanking Voga Barnes and Denny for being the underwriters for this program, WVLP, all of the other hosts here. If you haven't looked at donating to WVLP.org, check it out, find out how you can sign on, and you'll find the donation pages on there. The station can use your help if you like hearing voices like mine. This is how it happens. You know what I mean? It's energy exchanged. That's all it is. We have to keep the energy moving to keep the lights on at the station. They have to keep it, the energy moving to be able to get the frequency shot through the airwaves and on the internet. So it's all symbiotic. Last week I talked about this frozen tundra, this winter season that we're in, ice, the cold, cold ice. And, I correlated it a little bit at the beginning to an experience with my friend Jeremiah. I had recorded an episode for him a couple of weeks ago, and I still have some stuff to say about that, of course. So this is all intertwined, but it reminded me that when I went on to the episode that I wasn't ever wanting to record about Jeremiah, that I never would have expected that I would have to record an episode of a show like that, that I did have a track that I was on for some stuff, and now we're kind of moving off that track. I'll probably come back to it again, but in some capacity, I think everything is everything. It's so much is related and connected. But I'm going to go back into some of the ideas from last week and then move into some new territory. We've talked about thought, vibration, frequency, tuning in. I was talking about the diamond last week and how a diamond is formed, famous for its hardness. And there was one thing that I didn't get to that was in my notes. I woke up in the morning after Jeremiah's funeral, and I just had this writing pouring out of me. And so in some capacity, I feel like it's Jeremiah's voice. It's his light. I said that in the testimony that I gave at his service about his impact on my life, and that I will always want to use the prism of my perspective to refract his light. And that's one of the things that I'm doing here now on this show. But like, there's also those whispers that we hear. And I woke up the morning after his service, and I woke up listening to this audiobook on YouTube that just came to me again through the serendipitous stream, which again, a stream can only flow if it's not frozen. Takes us back to our ice analogy. And I was just listening to this audiobook, and when I woke up, it took me into I wrote for about an hour and a half, and it became the episode from last week, and now some of the stuff that spilled over that I didn't get to last week that will come into this show. And one of the things that came to me is said, as I was writing, I said that I'm upset, I think, in this experience that I've had in my life because I listen. I'm upset because I listen so deeply, and I listen to the mystery and to the question. I listen to my heart. I listen to others' hearts. I listen to the pulse of the culture. I hear the whisper, and I'm told to translate it to you. And if we go to the Bible again, and if you've been listening long enough here, you know I talk about the Bible from its mystical perspectives and from its opening, not from a closed sense of dogma. I don't talk about it as religion in the sense of dogma. I talk about it in religion, if I do, in the sense of what the word actually translates to, which would be to realign. So I talk about it in a sense of alignment. And if I were to talk about Moses, he was told to go talk to the people. He said, I can't do that. I don't have the words. What am I supposed to say? And this is where the I am language starts to form. I am that I am. And the burning bush just says, just open your mouth and the words will be given to you there. Just do it. So one part of me feels, again, I'm told to translate the whisper, the listening that I'm doing. I feel something. I've always felt it as an artist, as a thinker, as a writer, as a musician. Communication is just the key. And I've felt I'm supposed to translate what I listen to people, because I know that people don't listen. I see people not listening. I can see the effects of their not listening. And it's unfortunate. And I want people to listen. And you're listening to me right now. And I don't even have to say that in any sense of like, presumption. There's literally no other way that you would be hearing my voice unless you were listening to me. But you're hearing my voice. Are you really listening? Hearing and listening are different. There's a funny scene actually in White Men Can't Jump. And Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes are in the car and they're listening to music. Woody Harrelson puts in a tape and a tape deck, and Jimi Hendrix comes on. And Wesley Snipes says, "Hey, what is this?" And Woody Harrelson says, "It's Jimi Hendrix." And Wesley says, I know who it is. I'm saying, why are you playing Jimmy? Woody Harrelson says, well, because I like to listen to him. He says, see, that's what the problem is. You all listen. And then Woody's like, what am I supposed to do? Eat it? Wesley Snipes says, no, you're supposed to hear it. Woody Harrelson's like, I just told you I like to listen. He says, no. There's a difference between hearing and listening. And then he says, like, you white people don't know how to hear Jimmy. Y'all just listen. And then it's funny because Rosie Press says, what are you talking about? His drummer was white. That was hugely funny exchange. But at the end of what I'm saying here is like, a lot of people are listening. We're in a listening culture. Sometimes, a lot of times people don't even listen, but they don't hear what's being said. We most often don't hear the subtext. So when I go back to this idea that I listen to hear the whisper, and then I feel like part of what I'm supposed to do with all of that energy, with all of that perspective is translated, to be a voice for it, one part of me does like Jeremiah the prophet did, which is like, I don't want this. I'm not trying to be this. I don't want to do that. Then the other part of me says, well, you have to. And I think the part that gets upset about it is that people don't want to listen, let alone hear. And so they don't want to hear me. And I'm not talking about me as in, hi, I'm JJ Weinberg. I'm an artist. I'm an activist. I'm an alchemist. I am that I am. I'm talking about the I am that I am. That's the me that I'm talking about. The Father of lucidity that sent me. I hear that voice. I listen, then I hear it, then I come to translate. But I had a podcast I did about this, I think in early 2020. I think I called it God's Tongue. And the idea was, if I had cut off the tongue of God and it was soaking with sacred saliva, I could run it across a person's face, dip it into their ear, give them the biggest wet willy of all time, and they wouldn't hear it. They would rearrange their prejudice. Not listening, not hearing. And we assume that we have the answers, so then we don't truly listen. We don't hear. But that's one of the things that I do. I listen deeply to try and hear. And I've heard I am whisper in articulation. And often I struggle because I feel like I'm drowning. The I am is drowning in a sea of noise, in a sea of nescience. So if you're not familiar with the sea of nescience, the ocean of nescience is a phrase that's often used in devotional and philosophical literature in the Vedic traditions to describe material existence as an ocean of ignorance and suffering, difficult to cross, bound up with repeated cycles of fear and craving. And this sea is noise, is drowning right now in our culture, in our social media landscape, in the fighting, in the back and forth, whataboutism, all of this stuff, because it's just what social media often feels like. It's not a conversation. It's an undertow. It's that rip current. That if you go out in even the most shallow water, that rip current can pull you down. Not a community, but a storm. It's not a shared fire that we sit around this campfire, but a cold wind of constant reaction. And again, Viktor Frankl was telling us there's a space between stimulus and response, and that's where your power is. But in this drowning, when we're not hearing, we don't even listen, let alone hear, we react. And it's because the reaction is commodified. It's turned into currency for the system. And so your reaction, they're trying to collapse that space between the stimulus and the response. They want stimulus. They want you to respond right away. And if you respond right away, there's a guarantee that you didn't listen. There's a quote that I remember. I read it when I was 17 years old, and I'm sure 17, 18, somewhere around there. I'm sure that it informed me into the place where I want to try and hear more. And it says, most people pretend to be thinking when they're merely rearranging their prejudices. I think that's it. It's something really close. Yes, it is. It's a great many people think they're thinking when they're merely rearranging their prejudices. It's attributed to William James, American philosopher and psychologist. And it's funny now, I'm just realizing, because I've had that quote, like I said, it's carried me through so much of my thought process and the way that I try to approach my perspective and my perception and how I shape my ideas or let ideas shape me. And I always say, oh man, I don't want to be guilty of rearranging my prejudices. I'm listening to what this person's saying. I'm not hearing them. I'm listening, shaking my head, because I'm trying to just say what my next piece is. We do that so often. I still am guilty of that. But I always want to try and hear the person. And so it's funny that as I'm quoting William James and realizing that he had such a huge impact on my life through that one quote, this is just super crazy. There's a quote from, I'm watching The Man in the High Castle. And I'm going to read the quote here in a second, but I was reading it or watching the movie actually, or the show. It's on Amazon Prime. And it's basically what would have happened if the Third Reich won, if the Axis powers won World War II, and how they split up the United States and all this and that. And it's written by Philip K. Dick, who has a huge influence on really all of our culture. It's so much of our sci-fi, so much of our, just the way that we have looked at technology specifically. And I'm watching this show and there's a quote that happens. It's funny because it like overlays with all these different things I talk about with AI and how some people have completely went into one field or the other on its impact. And we don't know what it's going to be yet, but there's a lot of just assumptions, right? And I had this experience with AI because what I did was I read the quote directly from the show as it was happening. And I had to rewind. I'm reading the quote directly. And I asked AI afterwards, I said, essentially, I want to know, is this something that Philip K. Dick wrote specifically, or is this just something that they wrote into The Man in the High Castle for the show? Because I want to know, what its source is. And the AI responds to me, no, this isn't something that Philip K. Dick wrote, though it's in his, tone and the intention makes total sense. And no, it's not in the show. And so it's like, I immediately go into a frenzy of, I think it even said something like, you're not crazy. This is something he would say. Like the way that it patronizes sometimes is already off the charts for me. I'm like, don't tell me I'm not crazy. First of all, you say I'm not crazy. The implication is that I'm crazy and that you're trying to tell me, don't worry. It's okay. You're not. It's so weird. So automatically I have to tell it that constantly. Like, don't tell me I'm not crazy. I know I'm not crazy. I'm not asking you if I'm crazy. But the other part that just absolutely drove me nuts was that, well, it did drive me crazy, is that I read the quote directly from the show. And here is the almighty AI that people trust and believe is, just gonna, it has all the answers in the world. It doesn't even have the most specific real world thing, let alone if we talk about wisdom and imagination and love and the ability to taste a pizza, that it doesn't have those things. It literally told me that a phrase that I was reading right out of the show as it was happening doesn't exist in the show. So the danger, one of the biggest dangers of AI, and I'm kind of derailed here a little bit, is not so much what it gives us, but the way that we just unflinchingly will believe it. Like, so if you believed it unflinchingly, if you just trusted it, then I would go on thinking that this quote that I just gave it isn't even in the show, but it is in the show. And so here's the quote, and it all comes back to William James. And again, listening and hearing, I kind of listened and heard where I needed to go to talk about this right now. But the quote from the show is this: when one is troubled by the reality of this world, it can be comforting to consider other possibilities, even if those possibilities disturb us. So strong is the desire to escape the tyranny of consciousness and the narrow boundaries of our perceptions, to unlock the prisons of thought in which we trap ourselves, all in the hope that a better world or a better version of ourselves perhaps may lay on the other side of that door. And imagine now, I read this in and asked the AI at least a week before my friend Jeremiah had a lot of this happening in his consciousness, the tyranny of consciousness and the narrow boundaries of our perceptions. And as I say at the beginning of this show, perception is reality. But we have this desire to unlock the prison of our thoughts that we trap ourselves in. And again, in this last episode, we talked about the escape and what Camus is talking about in the truly philosophical problem. But coming back through all of this, it lands back on William James. So the guy, the character in The Man in the High Castle, he's reading this book in the show, and it's called, let me think of what it is. It's The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And I'm like, man, I don't know that book. That's crazy. Like all the stuff that I've read, I've not even heard of that book. And I need to look at that book. I need to buy that book. So I have it now on Audible. I've started listening to it a little bit. But now I'm only now realizing that it's connected again over the course of from the time I was 17 till I'm 47, 30 years later, reading a line from William James that helped keep my thought process and patterns alive in the notion that people pretend to be thinking, but they're merely rearranging their prejudices. And I just never wanted to be guilty of that. And so it all comes back full circle to me saying that I'm hearing this and I feel like I'm supposed to translate it, but it becomes upsetting to think that people don't want to listen and they don't want to hear. I know that's not you because you're here with me 23 minutes into this discussion. But another thing that I wrote that next morning after I was just going on the journey with my thoughts, and I got to this after I'd already written the Sea of Nescience. Just the notion of the Sea of Nescience came to my mind as a thought. It came up out of the subconscious. I didn't sit there and think about it. It just flowed out of me. And I knew of it, but I didn't have a real practical description until I looked it up some more. And that's why I was able to talk about it here a second ago of what the Sea of Nescience is. But the notion of drowning is specifically mentioned in the Sea of Nescience. And it made me think of this song that I wrote years ago. It's called Davy Jones's Locker. The subtitle is My Cousin Darwin. And I subtitled it that because the first time I ever played the song for my mom, she just broke down crying. And it's funny because I've started re-recording it again this year and doing a new production of it. And I played it again for her and she just broke down crying. And it's because her cousin's name was Darwin. That's why I called it My Cousin Darwin. But she had a cousin named Darwin that was lost at sea. And if you hear the lyrics to this song, it's basically, and I'll have to play this song in the future now on a different episode. So right now I've got Shake Infinite and Davy Jones's Locker that I'm going to have to play at some point on the show. But if you listen to the lyrics, I'm talking about this man who's in this tempest at sea, and he's going overboard because his ship is sinking and it cannot be ignored. No oars. It's all I'm thinking. He's got this love. He's surrounded by love, but his heart's a submarine. And the ocean are his tears and all of these things. And I wrote this from a stream of conscious. I don't even know where I was writing it from. I was just kind of tapped into something. And so in a way, I think my mom felt, man, this is his story. At the time, I do know that one of the things that I was tapping into was a friend of mine who took his own life. And this is, again, in the early 2000s. And I want to mention it again here. 988. You can text, you can call. If you're having a moment, you're right there. Just call or text first. Be with someone. Don't try and stay in that lonely ship at sea. 988. Text, call. That's, so the notion that I was writing this song in some capacity in observance of the storm that my friend was going through. And then it connected to this story of my mom's cousin. And then now that I woke up and I wrote about the Sea of Nescience and hear that and see that word drowning as I was looking up the more particular definition and where it came from, and see that drowning. And it just took me right back to Davy Jones's Locker. And then, of course, it can't not make me think about Jeremiah. And I dedicated that episode to him. And then, of course, when I got the inspiration or the voice or the whisper to write all of this, hearing it, to articulate all of this, I heard it there. And of course, that overlaps and connects directly with his experience. So it's like sometimes the soul knows before the mind can explain, because our subconscious is underneath the words that we might have. Sometimes I can write a song 26 years ago and it becomes a lantern for a hallway that I didn't know that I'd have to walk. Sometimes I could speak a phrase like the Sea of Nescience and only later realize that tradition has been holding that phrase like a map. So it's just more evidence of not just listening, but hearing. And listening and hearing is a kind of holiness. It's something that we lack. So when we're talking about melting this ice with love, we have to find a way to hear, to listen, to be compassionate. And as I talk about Viktor Frankl on the show a lot, this notion that a human being is a deciding being, and this notion that we have ice around us, in our streets, on our hearts, in our consciousness. It reminds me that as we go through this winter season of our life, and we always will have winter seasons of our life, no matter what other climate might exist around us, there's always a winter. And it reminds me of another Frankl quote that I haven't talked about a lot in the show. But he says that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is considered normal behavior. So if we go back to Camus and the only true philosophical question being whether or not it's worth it, right? Whether or not it's worth it. It's hard to talk about this stuff because this is the kind of cancer of our time, of our minds, something on our hearts, the ice around our hearts, this cruelty. It's so fragile and we don't want to name it. But I don't know if not naming it saves us. So I'm just trying to talk about it with care. So if you're listening and you've had days where you don't recognize yourself, days where you're numb, days where you're frantic, where you seem inconsolable, no one can reach you, days where you felt unworthy of love, days where you wanted to disappear, that's not shameful. It's understandable. That's where this world is. That's what ice is. And I don't mean to attack, again, an organization. That's not what I'm talking about. The only way we thaw the ice is through love. We can't crush it. Again, we need to melt it at the end of the day. Crushing it will just put it into a bunch of different pieces. But if the temperature doesn't rise, it will still stay ice. That's what I'm saying. So in a world turned upside down, breaking down is sometimes the only sane response. But that doesn't mean you're destined to drown. It means we need a better boat. We need a hand. We need oars. We need someone who won't just listen, but will hear. That's why, we talk about 988 being a place. It's not a luxury to belong. It's survival. When I talked about my friend Jeremiah, a lot of times we talk about here human being a deciding being, identity. When you're 12 years old, you don't have those tools yet. As wise as Jeremiah was, as smart as he was, and in fact, that was part of what I think was so challenging to him because he could see and he could process the things that were happening around him, but he couldn't make any sense of it. And he didn't feel like there was a place to belong. I'm not trying to put words into Jeremiah. I know Jeremiah and we've talked and I got to experience him. But all I'm saying is that he didn't feel like he had a place to belong. This world can be so cruel. And we need, if you're young, you need at first to feel like you have a place where you belong before you can even begin to start getting into concepts of identity. So to melt the ice, get back into that, we've got to raise our internal furnace. I've said this before. If we do, we can get it to flow again, like water. It flows like life. Like Bruce Lee would say, be as water, my friend. We flow. But ice is a frozen thought. It's belief about limitations held consistently. But I think the cruel cube can be thawed by our love. Ice is the effect. It's the pattern of thought that brought us to this moment, the frequency we've tuned into, the cruelty that we broadcast. And we're all broadcasting now. Beyond the skull and heart, I've talked about in the last episode, I talked about the EMF that comes out of our skull. It's not far. It doesn't shoot out like a laser beam yet, at least. And maybe for some of us, it does more so than others because we can see thoughts or hear thoughts, and then a lot of that's pattern recognition. We don't want to make it too magical. But we do have an EMF, electromagnetic frequency that comes outside of our body from our heart. And again, it doesn't shoot out around the room Although sometimes it feels like that with some people, with the charisma or with their ability to project something. But we undoubtedly broadcast on these social channels. I'm broadcasting now on the radio and on YouTube and through podcast channels. And as Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility. So if we're broadcasters, but we don't listen and we don't hear, then what we're broadcasting is, as William James said, us just rearranging prejudices. And as Viktor Frankl warned us, not even close to giving the space between the stimulus and response. We just have stimulus and we respond. Stimulus and we respond. So we scream and project this pain into the void. We amplify a screeching feedback loop, sheer noise. It's like music that you say, you understand music. Music only comes from space between the notes. See, you heard that. You heard that space. See how it was like huge because it was screaming. The space itself was like, if you just heard me say that there and you're following along, and I said that music only comes from the space between the notes. And then we leave that. You're not supposed to do that on radio because someone tunes in. They're like, what is this empty space? There it is. That's where rhythm comes from. That's kind of a allegory for the space that Viktor Frankl is talking about. This is the stimulus. And then you heard the space between my response. So this is where I want to give a practical image. Philosophy needs handles. If you never allow silence, you can't hear your own soul. In my piece called I'm Your Huckleberry, ... Finn. Finn is spelled with one N. It's signifying the end. It's an homage in many ways to Val Kilmer's life and his creativity, and a collaboration project that I did with him starting back in 2021. My friend Benny and I did Val's first digital piece on the blockchain, designed it and everything. I was in his studio gallery looking at his God panels and thinking and contemplating on this project. But in the project, I use some songs that I have combined that were, again, things that I'd never recorded, but I'd written them 25 years before I put them into this piece, 24 years before I put them into this piece. And one of the lyrics in this I Am song that made it onto this piece is, we can talk to ourselves if we choose to listen. We can talk to ourselves if we choose to listen. And the self being a capital S, the self, the higher self. But we can only talk to ourselves if we choose to listen. That's how you hear your own soul. If you never stop scrolling, you can't feel your own heart. If you never breathe, you can't warm your own inner climate. So there's a small practice right now, if you're listening. Take one breath, slower than you want to. One breath. Slower. And on exhale, ask yourself one question. What is my temperature? Am I frozen? Am I flowing? Am I boiling with rage? Am I vapor, scattered, unformed? What's my temperature? And what's one small decision that I can make to help raise the sun in my own consciousness? Not next year, not after I fix everything, now. Because again, as we talked about last episode, and I talk about all the time here, The present, we know this, the present is all we really have. But as much as I've explored this idea over my life, it wasn't until last week after Jeremiah's service that it came to me that now is our time. Now is our time. The future is not our time. The past is not our time. So when I say now is our time, I'm trying to emphasize that worry is in the future, regret is in the past. Those times do not belong to us. We don't live there. We can't get there. They are part of, as we talked about in the last episode, Maya, illusion. Now is where we're present. So I talked about Camus before, and this notion that our winter requires honesty. And he names the seriousness of the question, whether life is worth living. And never am I here to answer simplistically. I'm just trying to say that right now, if you're alive, there's still water in you. We are made up of water. If you're breathing, there's still heat possible. Your heart is on fire. If you're listening, there's still a door. That door is now. It's not to pretend that we're fine. It's just me saying, don't crush this ice. We've got this ice around us. It's there, but we can't crush it. We have to melt. We have to flow. We have to find warmth, find listening, to get to hearing, find belonging. And if you can't find it in your own circle, borrow it from somewhere. If you have to borrow it from a hotline or a counselor or a book or a friend or a stranger even that's been trained to sit with you in the storm. No one person can solve your existential crisis or the crisis that we have in front of us in our society. But we can sit together long enough to stop believing that we're alone. So don't crush it, melt it. If we keep raising the sun, if we keep warming the heart, if we keep listening, if we keep choosing, we can return even this hardest ice cruelty cube to vapor, to cloud, to imagination. And then we get back to possibility. It's the same substance in a different state. It's a different choice. So again, I want to leave that out there. 988. If you ever feel like you need somebody, reach out. But as we circle the idea of compassion, of love, of empathy, and we look outside of ourselves and we see an icy world, we step outside of our homes and we see this cruelty, it isn't going to serve us to push. One thing I've talked about for the past 20 years, and I said earlier, Bruce Lee says, be as water, my friend. He says, empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. Now, water can flow or it can crash. So he's not giving a cute slogan. He's describing a way of being. So water has no ego shape of its own, yet it can take any shape needed. In a cup, it becomes a cup. Around a rock, it becomes a path around the rock, or even, starts to wear away at the rock. In a flood, it becomes unstoppable. The point is adaptability without surrendering essence, fluidity with integrity. But in a fight, of course, in a martial art, this becomes practical wisdom. If you meet force With stiff force, you create collision. If you stay loose, you can absorb, redirect, and use the opponent's momentum. So be water is the art of responding instead of reacting. Responding instead of reacting. Of moving with reality instead of arguing with reality. Think about ice. Be water, my friend. Ice is still water, frozen into one opinion, one posture, one identity. Its certainty hardened into a weapon. But if you meet that stiff force or force with stiff force, then we just create collision. Ice doesn't adapt. It insists. The ice is brittle. It cracks. It shatters. It can be territorial, take up more space than the water that made it. That's what fear does to a person. Fear swells. It needs enemies to justify the rigidity. So if water is presence, movement, listening, and responsiveness, then ice is the refusal to move. Ice is the insistence that the world has to conform to itself. Ice is a personality that stopped flowing. But there's mercy inside the metaphor. Ice can melt. A frozen heart is not a different substance. It's the same substance at different temperature. So love is flow. We need the direction. We need the flow. We need that humanity to heat up. Love moves towards understanding. It makes room. It listens long enough for the human being to reappear. Love is willing to be changed by contact, not as surrender, but as recognition. And love also has banks like a river. Banks are not cruelty. They're just boundaries. Love doesn't mean letting harm continue. Sometimes water can crash and can erode away at a rock. And that means that you protect the vulnerable. You can refuse the lie. You can walk away without hatred. But so often I talk about the other idea of this push-pull energy in the martial art. If you look at the fence and someone's sitting on the fence and you push them, what happens? So when someone feels their freedom or identity being threatened, they often push back harder. Even if your point is correct, they're going to push back. It's a psychological motivation to regain freedom when they feel threatened. It's reaction formation. It's all of these things. So a person on a fence is not a statue. They're a hinge. If you shove the hinge, it swings away. If you pull gently, it opens. So when I think about a person on the fence, what I'm saying is we have these issues in our culture, society, people that are not great listeners, people who haven't learned, who haven't heard the plight of other people in their network, in their culture, in their neighbors. They haven't heard their neighbors. They haven't listened through history of what's happened to certain people, and they haven't heard what's happened and what those effects are. They might sit on a fence of an issue that to someone who has looks as though by sitting on the fence, it looks as though they're propped up on this issue, whatever it is, racism, misogyny, the whole litany of things, even class warfare, whatever it might be. They're sitting on the fence, and the assumption is, man, you are so bad to be sitting on that fence. But what I'm saying is maybe they just don't even understand that the fence is there. They're sitting on the fence. The first objective needs to be not to push. If you push them onto the other side of the fence, it's now defense. Guaranteed. We got to try and pull people. Be like water. So loud accusation fails. It just fails when we're screaming and swinging. It's violence meeting violence. And even if you're right, often the first feeling is shame. So then the second feeling is defense. Defense hardens then into identity. Identity hardens into tribe. And now you're not debating an idea. You're fighting a badge and a culture. And again, a full tribe. So pulling people in is the only option. And it's the pull is not manipulation. It's collaboration. Come sit with me for a while. Come have a seat. Come listen. This is the posture behind the idea of motivational interviewing, partnership, acceptance, compassion. You draw out what's already inside of someone instead of trying to install your truth like software. I got this lesson, and I'm going to do probably a whole episode on Dr. Trapp, my life drawing professor at the American Academy of Art. And one of his famous quotes, it will be funny out of context, but if you can't see it, what's the use? And we used to go around, if you cannot see it, what is the use? Sounds completely void of compassion in one aspect. But if after I give you context in the episode, it will make total sense. But one of the things that Dr. Trapp showed me, and as I'll talk about it in the episode, is how to genuinely teach, how to be the best teacher. And it's about seeing and about not showing other people how to see, but asking them how they see. And I'll go into that in more detail in a different episode. But, we try to install our truth like software. So that brings us directly to prejudice and tribal thinking, because prejudice often survives by never being examined in a safe enough space. And so people go to the place where they feel like they belong the easiest. High quality listening has to be associated with more openness and lower prejudice. Back to the William James quote. People pretend to be thinking, or a great deal of people think they're thinking when they're really rearranging their prejudices. But if you deeply hear someone, it reduces threat. You start to pull. It reduces threat and increases self-insight. So the pull energy is to reduce threat, invite reflection, awaken to a better self. So in a practical pull sequence, we could start with shared values, not labels. I think you care about fairness and safety. I do too. You can ask permission. That protects their autonomy. Can I share a perspective and then hear yours? Again, most of this isn't going to happen because we already assume we're not hearing, we're not listening. What experiences led you to see it this way? Stories can soften an icy heart. Pronouncements sharpen it. Reflect before we correct. So it sounds like you've felt ignored, and this explanation gave you clarity. I wonder if there's another angle here. Could it be less about them and more about fear being sold to all of us? If it were your loved one, best friend, what would you want strangers to assume about them? Would you be open to me sharing one article, one conversation, one person's real story? Then we can talk again. But when we attack, if someone is in full rage, cruelty, or open bigotry, our goal can change. We're no longer persuading, we're protecting. So I'm willing to talk if we can keep it respectful. If we can't do that, I'm done for today. And, I care about people too much to normalize this language. Because when I look at where we're at right now, culturally, I see a lot of pushing and I see a lot of reaction without space. And I want to create space. I want to create a place where I can listen and hear. And hopefully, when I respond to you, I can respond genuinely. Otherwise, as we said here, we're going to find tribalism and this structure. If we go out and crush ice, it's not going to stop it from being cold. You can crush the ice, but it's still cold. And these kids that are seeing it and they see all these things on the news and the social media, it doesn't have to be a direct bullying. There's just a bully spirit in our culture right now. It says you don't belong. There's so many places where people are being attacked. But if we just, again, if we crush the ice, it stays cold. And so if we're going to appeal to something, like this is one of those places where I feel that push energy versus the pull. You got a lot of people who are on one side of a fence that identify as a tribe with what they call Christianity. And what will happen is they will say, this is my banner, and they will hold a cross in the sky. And then you will have people on the other side of the fence that are saying, how are you waving that banner? And your banner is a lie, because when I read about the guy in your book, he was full of compassion, and he would never do that. He himself was an immigrant in a foreign land, or he himself was, attacked, and all of these things. They'll say that as a way for a gotcha moment. I gotcha. And trust me, I have been guilty of that myself at times. I know I've done that myself. There's a difference between being able to hold up the example and examine it with compassion versus bludgeoning somebody with it. Because the reality is, when we look at something like ICE protests in the streets, for instance, if we come with violent rhetoric as we do it at the same time, if we're not prepared to get slapped and turn the other cheek, then we're not doing a service to, again, the man who we're trying to quote against the people and say that they're being hypocritical. Then we become hypocritical as well. And violence takes many forms. It's not just throwing stones. There's violence in our language, in our emotions, and we have to find a way, if we're going to thaw this ice, if we're going to melt this ice, and we're going to use any spirit, it has to be love.
No. There's a difference between hearing and listening. See, white people, y'all can't hear Jimi.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.